very special day for this project because it's the last moment of emptiness and stillness before all the action happens. And this is a really important moment in the creative process. And it can be really overwhelming too, because there's a lot of inertia to overcome. You know, it's like just nothing's happening here and a lot is about to happen. And so that's something that I really encourage, being really gentle with ourselves in that stage of this process, because it's easy to feel overwhelmed, and this is like probably the hardest part to really move through. And I always try to allow myself as much time as I really need to feel confident about the vision and what the first steps are. So we have decided that this is the general vicinity of where we want to build. We know that we're aiming for about a 12-foot diameter circle, which is this tape measure right here. So it's like twice my wingspan pretty much. And we're going to go down slope from this plane up here, because that's going to give us a fun height difference to play with. And we just haven't decided exactly where it is yet. So this part is kind of like a listening process for me, and then also an artistic process of just kind of seeing where the shape fits best with the landscape. We're going to be building this on a deck that will be built in between these first posts that are going to be set. So that's kind of like the lowest impact way of doing a house like this, because it doesn't require a big concrete slab or stem wall. It's just enough concrete for each post, and then everything else is built off of those posts. So first step is figure out the perimeter of the space and dig each hole for where each post is going to go. So that's how I'm kind of getting the momentum going, is like taking inventory of the materials I have to work with, deciding exactly what piece is going to be used where, and then digging the holes accordingly at the right space apart based on the dimensions we want, and then standing the posts up into the holes. I just cut these little stakes as something to just give us reference that we're going to set. I just cut, an angle so it goes into the ground, and we're going to set these for kind of an example of where our posts are going to go. And they're probably going to end up getting moved around a lot, so I'm not going to hesitate too much to just set the first one. Don't want to overthink it. And then we'll just go from here, and I'll do a quick calculation of what the distance between posts is going to be. So if we're creating a perfect circle, it's definitely not going to be perfect, but in theory, we want to know the circumference of the circle, and then we want to divide that by however many posts we're going to be using. So finding the circumference is just a simple equation that you need to know the radius or the diameter of the circle for. And we're going with a 12-foot diameter, and if I remember correctly, it's pi 2r is the circumference, but I'm going to double check that on my phone. Handy phones, very helpful in these processes. And then calculate, what roughly, I think it's going to be somewhere around like 7 feet between each post. And then you also want to check the distance to the center. So you know your radius, and you know the distance between posts, and the distance between those two things. If you know those two measurements, and I'll demonstrate this more when I actually have the right measurements, if you connect those two lines, then it's going to tell you where the next post is, and that's how you end up with a true circle. This will be our center. So we'll go 6 feet, which is the radius. I'm just going to go right there for now. Double check that didn't move too much. And again, this is like, I'm not too concerned about this being perfect, and that's because the posts that I'm going to be using are pretty big, and we're going to be notching the framing for the deck into those posts. So with each post, there'll be a little bit of wiggle room for, you know, like a 2 to 3 inches of wiggle room. So this is 6 feet. So the next post should be, should be 6 feet from this and 6 1/4 feet from that. So I'm gonna guess. Is it really 6 feet? Crazy.
Right?
It's like less. That's weird.
I think it's because that one's a little lower on the slope and is lower.
Yeah, totally. So I'm gonna guess we're somewhere around here. Set this here for now, so that's 6 1/4, which is 6 3 inches, and then is this 6 feet? That was a pretty good guess. So I know that that's 6 1/4, but then it needs to go in more that way, so I'm going to try to move it in that way without going closer to that one. So it's like something like that. That's 6 feet, and then that's 6 1/4. Cool. So right there. And you know that depending on how many posts you use, what your diameter is, it's not always going to end up being so close like this, like 6 and 6 1/4. But I kind of like that it's close like that because it simplifies things. And I find it really fascinating that always these spaces look really small when there's nothing there, and then as you start to build, they feel bigger and bigger. So that's also something to keep in mind. If it's like, oh, this isn't going to be enough room, just know that it's going to get bigger as the space gets filled in, which is always trips me out, but it never ceases to be that way, or never fails to be that way. That's 6 feet again, and then that looks to me like 6 1/4 is maybe like that. 6 3, and I'll make sure that got bigger. Now that's 6. I'm just kind of adjusting it until you get it, and that's it. There we go. So right there. I left these stakes long so that we could kind of have some height to play with when we're imagining how tall the deck is going to be. Cool. So that gives us a feel for the size we're working with. And the one other thing I wanted to get a feel for right off the bat is the height of the deck. So, based on my minimum of 1.5 feet, which is 18 inches. So I say I'd like to be at least there. I'm just going to tie this string right here. And then go this way. The lowest point, which is this one. And we've got this very fancy tool that's really easy to lose. I'm going to lose this. This is a line level or a string level, so you can see it's got a little bubble level in there, and then these hook onto a string. So very simple technology again, but just like exactly what you need in this kind of situation. You could use high-tech stuff like a contractor's level or a laser level or a survey level or whatever. There's all these names, but this thing basically just, I knew this was going to be way higher than I thought. See, so this is important because you can just never guess this kind of thing right. I need to pull this my way so I can see it better. So I want that to read level, which is right about there. So see, this is what I was talking about, is that's pretty high. Like, I'd rather not have to go this high on the low end. So I might want to bring that down, go to like a foot, or I'm going to want to move the whole thing over that way maybe, because that's a little bit flatter, it looks like. Or I just accept that the house looks like it's going to be like really floating on this side, which could be kind of interesting effect. But this is really like always the moment of truth when you're doing a deck. It's like, I would not have guessed it would have been this high. This is a really fun piece of wood here. It inspired the idea of having a crow's nest at the top of the building. That's why I like to, if you are in the situation where you have access to forests that can be thinned out, or just to urban timber trees that are coming down, and you can either, if you have experience felling trees, or if you know someone who does, or can work with the arborist, to encourage that as much of the shape of the tree gets preserved as possible. Because typically this would have just all gotten chopped up when it came down, but I like to leave these shapes because they inspire the whole design of the building. And that's just like, in general, what I like to do is materials-based design. It's like, what can I get, first of all, like what material is in abundance in as close proximity to the build site as possible, and then what do those materials lend themselves to? So maybe you're in a city and you can get a bunch of free shipping pallets, and you build your place out of shipping pallets, and that informs the design. But in this case, it's cedar trees, and they have such beautiful shapes that I really like to pay attention to the shapes and see what that inspires. And so this whole house is going to be centered around this kind of crow's nest that was inspired by this tree. So I need to make sure that, based on the height of the deck that we just determined is going to be about 3 feet at its highest point, that there's going to be enough length for this post to go 3 feet into the ground, 3 feet up to the deck, and then still have enough length to give clearance for the base floor and then the loft, and then for that crow's nest to be on top. So I'm just thinking in terms of, what's the final height going to be, and do we have enough? And it looks like we have like just perfectly enough based on that deck height, so this tree is still going to work. And I'm basically going to go through the whole inventory of what we have and make sure that I have 6 posts that are all going to be the right height, and then this is the 7th one in the middle. So assuming that all of that is good, then we'll be able to move forward with this placement of the deck. I just used white primer on the bottom of these, and that is to just kind of slow down the drying process a little bit, because trees move water vertically when they're alive and when they're dead. So when you cut a tree down and you leave it to dry, it's good to have it in the shade. So that's why they're over here, because if it dries too fast, it's more likely to crack. And then also slow down the drying as much as possible. So beyond just having it in the shade, painting the base is also a good way of kind of just making that water leave a little slower. I don't know if this actually makes a difference, but I kind of intuitively just wanted to put the base uphill, because the water has to go against gravity to leave the tree. So we do want them to dry out, but we want them to dry out slowly.